Going into Black Ops 7 Zombies, there's a lot that I'm very excited about. A lot of gameplay things, aesthetic things, and even map locations and stuff like that. But there's one thing that I can't help but feel worried about, and that's the story. I mean, can you blame me? I mean, look at the Dark Ethers so far. You look at Black Ops 6 and the mess of a story that was. And then even before that in Cold War, where the story was just, its own little mess in a different way entirely. And especially going into Black Ops 7, now that they're bringing back the OG characters, they cannot mess this up. They need to know how important these characters are to the community that they've been serving for so long, and they need to get this story right now that they are back. There is no excuses, because if you mess up these characters, the community will not forgive you for ruining these characters for so many people. And that's exactly what I want to talk about. How Treyarch can actually make the story of Black Ops 7 Zombies actually good. And don't get me wrong, I'm not arrogant here. I'm going to tell you exactly how Treyarch should tell their story. I'm going to hand them a script. No, that's not even it. In fact, I've never written of anything of any significance at all in my entire life. That's not what I'm trying to do here. Instead, I want to get down to the way they tell their story, the storytelling methods that they use, and how they actually used to do them very different in the past with the old Ether story, and all they have to do is just refer to their own work to make this story good again. That's all it takes. Just look at what you did in the past and do something similar again here. And not in terms of themes or anything like that. I'm talking about in terms of the style of how you tell your story. And I think by the end of this video, a lot of you guys are going to agree with what I have to say. But with that said, let's talk about the Call of Duty Zombies story. Now, I want to start this all off by asking you guys a simple question. Why exactly did back in the day with the old Ether story, Mr. Ruffle Waffles could upload an interview with Jason Blundell that is exclusively story related and get hundreds of thousands to millions of views, where now with the Dark Ether story, you struggle to find people even making theory videos on this story? What is the big difference? I mean, sure, you could say maybe it's the characters and how much they love them and everybody loved those characters and stuff like that, but to me, it's really not that. What it is the way they used to tell the story. Because back then, the story and the details mattered. Everything tied together. Nothing was as it seems. There was a mystery there. There was a puzzle. That's it. The story felt like a puzzle that we all had to come together as a community and solve together. And that's what I think they need to capture again with Black Ops 7 Zombies. Because with the Dark Ether story so far, it's just not that. What this feels like is just your regular story. Everything's self-contained. Everything is just focused on what's going to happen next. There's nothing tying into the past or anything like that. Everything is just looking forward, like a very linear story like we see with literally everything else. And the only theories that anybody even makes on this story anymore are things about the future. I mean, there's a few examples here and there where it's not the case, but mainly everything is just working towards the future. There's nothing significant about the past and the details of the past. Whereas you compare that to the OG story, everything mattered. Every detail mattered because we all knew it could tie into something for the future. And to really amplify this, I mean, think about this. There is a random poster for Ascension that came out for Black Ops 1 where there's just a random bald guy on it that was just never explained, but then all of a sudden in Black Ops 3, he's significant again, and we finally get explanations for that. Like, that is the difference, because even as small as a detail as a random guy on a poster is important to that story. But now we just don't see things like that. And that is just the smallest example. I want to give you two other huge examples of this in things that matter. And the first example I want to use in comparison to the modern story is going to be the Wonderwaff and its story, and compare that to literally any wonder weapon in the history of the modern zombie story or the Dark Ether story, and just compare them. But we're going to use the jet gun specifically for this one, because looking at this jet gun, we could look at it, what's the story behind it? Because we know that the jet gun is originally from Transit, so it's an interesting question. How did it get from Transit to here, especially as Transit's from a whole entire different universe? Like, what happened there? So there's some intrigue there, especially now that it has upgrades. Like, what's going on there? There's questions that we want answers to. and then we get Liberty Falls, we play the map, and then we learn through one radio and one document. It's just some random guy just made it again. It has nothing to do with the original jet gun at all. Like, that's the story of it. It's all wrapped up. And this is even the first time this happened. This also happened with the DG2 in this story too, when we saw it inside of Vanguard zombies. We see examples of this where it's the story and their creation of these wonder weapons just isn't as important. And look to almost every wonder weapon in the Dark Aether story. They're all very similar. Even the ones that do cross over from the original universe to this one, like the Ice Staff, I mean, there's some questions there, but they never even give us even vague hints at how this could potentially be important, especially with the Ice Staff. You would think that would be important. But then now we compare this to the original wonder weapon, the first ever wonder weapon with the Wonderwaff DG2. We look at this story. We first get it in Shinonuma, and in Shinonuma, we're not told much about it. But then it returns again in Dorize. And in Dorize, we heard through the radios that this was actually created by one of our playable characters, Richtofen. He's the one who created this. But it's not just that, there's more to that, because on top of that, we learned that he created it in a group called Group 935, and what he wanted to do was have it mass produced for the war effort. But the leader of this group, Ludwig Maxis, was against that. Whether because of jealousy or just because he really didn't believe in it, we're not entirely sure, but regardless, he not only denied mass production of it, but even insulted Richtofen, made fun of his creation for it being not up to par as what he thought it was. And this of course builds a rage in Richtofen, and because of this, Richtofen takes his revenge out on Maxis by luring him, his daughter, and even their puppy into a teleporter and teleport them away. And if you guys know the story, that's literally how the entirety of the old Aether storyline starts, because of that alone right there, teleporting him away. That's how Samantha gets into the MPD. That's how Maxis ends up the way he is, and even the Hellhounds. Like, all of that ties together, and this is all because of the Wonderwaff DG2. Think about the importance of that wonder weapon compared to any wonder weapon in the modern zombie story. Which one is that important? And don't get me wrong, not every wonder weapon is that important in the old Aether story. Obviously, I only picked the DG2 because it's the first one ever, and there's some that they're not as important, obviously. I'm not saying that every wonder weapon has to have as deep as a story as the Wonderwaff, but it's just in comparison. There's just nothing there that ties in like that. And again, that's not even the only example. Another great example is actually comparing the two maps, the Reisendrache and Citadel. And as much as I love Citadel's gameplay, its story is so disappointing. And once again, I want to compare these two stories, and starting off with the Reisendrache, because we know we're on a castle, but you don't really think too much about that. But if you cared about it, you could look more into this, and you find out this castle was ran by the Wolf King. And we hear a little bit of things about him. We hear he probably had the bows built, not sure why exactly. And we also know that he ended up dying in some sort of war. And we learned this through murals. They're actually a part of an Easter egg quest. And we see him fighting this weird dragon beast in the sky. It's like, that's weird. What's going on there? And that starts off questions on its own. The community could already get involved, like, well, what kind of war was he fighting here? That's kind of interesting. But then it's just left alone because the next map is Zetsubo and we're going to move on. But then we learn later on down the road that this king is not just a one-off character for the Reisendrache, but we learn that this king fought alongside Primus when they are teleported back to ancient times and they fight the Great War together. Yes, this king fought alongside our characters during the Great War, and now it all made sense with those teases they gave us through the murals where we see them fighting this war and fighting now what we knew was apothecans. That's what was going on, and that is so cool. And more importantly, now we learn why he built the bows, because he saw the staffs and wanted to have something similar to them. That is how it all makes sense, and it's so amazing because everything ties into everything. And more importantly, things not only tie forward and move forward with that story, but also backwards. Things give context to things in the past and make it a lot more interesting. Something that may have seemed like just some one-off characters or whatever they want, but instead now that character is actually important and much more important than we ever had thought. But now, let's compare this to Citadel's story, because I mean, at face value, this seems like the more interesting story, because we have this former Templar and he kind of got excommunicated from everything else, but along his journeys through the world as he was conquering things, he started collecting these relics and started getting more interested in magic and stuff like that. And in fact, these relics are used for the incantations that we see in the map. But then even more so, he has 4 bastard sons, and when he has them, he builds them all of these 4 magical swords. And on top of that, he builds the golem to protect the amulet. And all of that sounds absolutely insane, and that gives great story context to why everything is the way it is in Citadel. But the problem is, when do these ever pop up again? Like, when is anything tied back into this? A lot of people thought the Owl King was going to be important again, but we don't see him again outside of his face being buried in the spawn room of the tomb. We don't get context of him again. We don't get an explanation for why he had the amulet. We don't get context to why he built the golem to protect that amulet. We don't even understand why he built the 4 swords for his bastard sons. It seems like he just did it because he's insane, I guess. I mean, we don't even get an explanation for that. Nothing's important. And compare that to the story of the Reisendrache, because the bows were built because he saw the staffs and he thought that was cool. That, hey, let's have something like that for ourselves. And that was it. But now the swords are just there because, haha, I'm just going to mess with my bastard sons that I don't love. Like, what? I just don't even know what to say to that. Like, it's absolute insanity. Like, how is nothing important in this story? How is nothing important outside of its own map? And that is kind of the bigger problem with a lot of the Black Ops 6 story, is that every single map has interesting things there, but the story of all those maps are so isolated just to that map. They're so self-contained. There's no overall arching story that's happening in the background. The only overall arching story is the main story themes. There's nothing happening in the background like we saw so much with the old OG story. And that to me is a humongous problem, and why so many people just aren't as interested in the details of the modern zombie story, because what point is there to be interested in the details? Why do you care about the Owl? Why do you care about Archibald? Why do you care about the characters in the mural in Shattered Vale? Like, why do you care about these characters? Because they're never going to be important again. Why do you care about their backstories? It doesn't matter, because they only exist for that map and the story beats in it. Like, they don't exist outside of that. And that's a problem with it, because you have no reason to be intrigued with the details of this story, because they just won't matter in the future. And again, I'll bring it up once more. Not only the comparisons that I just talked about, but when you compare that to the old Ether story, where things as random as a bald guy on a poster will be important again in the future, it's just not on the same level. But it doesn't end there. It's not even this overall arching idea of the style of storytelling that we lost with the Dark Ether story, but it's also even through the methods that they tell the story. Because if we look at the main ways to tell a story outside of cutscenes, that's going to be radios, documents, and conversations. And even as the one who collected all of the conversational quotes in the entirety of Black Ops 6, I'll straight up tell you, they're terrible in that game. For the first 3 maps, they're talking about things that don't even matter. I mean, sure, there's things that are fine there, where character building and relationship building, that's fine. I'm fine with that. But everything else they talk about in terms of actual story stuff, it's just not great. Because even the 2 maps that it does have real story information shared in those, it's just so bad in the way they share it. Because for the first 3 maps, as I said, it's just conversations about personal relationships, mainly in Terminus, and then the next 2 maps, the only story stuff is our characters asking, can we trust this AI or not? But they don't give us a reason why or why we shouldn't. It's just, is she an AI? I don't know if I should trust this robot. But we don't actually care about the character as a person, and the reason why we shouldn't trust it or not is just because she's AI. That's the whole reason. Like, come on, give us a reason for why we do that. Because keep in mind, it was not until Shattered Vale that we learned the true goals of the Sam AI. And that wouldn't be a problem if they revealed that, but we didn't get one teaser, not one thing to allude to the real reason that the Sam AI wanted to get the Sentinel artifact to build herself her own body. We didn't have one hint of that. There was not one person guessing that or making a theory about that, because they gave us nothing before that. There was literally not one hint before that. And that's the lack of the puzzle that existed, because it wasn't until we got Shattered Vale that we actually got a decent conversational quotes. Now, I think they're a bit too much on the nose because it's too obvious what they were implying here, but this was the first time in these conversations that we actually heard something that was teasing something that was kind of for the future. And of course, this is when you hear the conversations between our characters and the Sam AI, and also the Sam AI starting to mention things about, you know, wanting a body again and stuff like that. And then we start to figure out, hey, that's probably the reason why she wants a Sentinel artifact. Now again, this is an overall problem that we're going to get into later also with the modern zombie stories, that they just over explain everything and there's too on the nose and they don't know how to hint at things anymore and allude to things without actually straight up saying things. But we'll get to that later. But regardless, this was the first time we at least got that information. But the problem with it is, even when we get this information, it's too late. It doesn't matter, because when we got Shattered Veil, most people are going to play the Easter egg, watch the ending cutscene, and see the big reveal there. We're going to see the Samurai betray us. We're going to hear that Richtofen tells us that her real goal is to build a body for herself with the Sentinel artifact. We're going to learn all of that right there in those cutscenes. And then we're going to hear the conversational quotes, because nobody collects the conversational quotes before the Easter egg is solved. Nobody does that. Oh, I just watched all that cutscene stuff. That's crazy. And then, hey, tell them just to upload the conversational quotes. Let's listen to that. Oh, they're teasing something that we already saw happen. Like, bro, Treyarch, you have to know that. Like, that's not how it works. Like, nobody is listening to the conversation quotes before the ending cutscene. Nobody's doing that. So what is even the point? And if you wanted to do this right, Treyarch, what you would have done is, first off, get those conversations and put them in the previous map so we could actually theorize on what's going to happen towards the future at the very least. But secondly, you would have made them a lot more vague, because they were just flat out saying practically what her goals were, which is not what we want. We want a puzzle here again. And that's the problem with them. And once again, I want to use an example from Treyarch's own past on how this was done right with conversations. And my gosh, there's so many great examples, because the conversations in the past were so good. But the one I'm going to use is actually from Gorod Krovi and those conversations, because these are actually really interesting. And to understand them, you have to remember where we just came off from. We just got Zetsubo no Shima, we collected the soul of Takeo, but then the screen flashes white, and next thing we see is our characters walking out of a portal? Wait, why? And then also now we see blood vials on all the characters, not just Richtofen. But of course the story stops there. We don't get anything more, because that's where that story ends. But this brings us to Gorod Krovi. And what would you expect if our characters went on a little side journey? You would expect them to talk about it. And guess what? They actually do. And when they do this, we actually have Dempsey questioning Richtofen. He questions him in two ways. He questions, what are these blood vials for? Why did we go get them? And why did we go to that prison? And that is great storytelling, because now we can start theorizing on what prison that is, which we all figured it's probably Mob of the Dead. And we can start theorizing, why did we get the blood vials from there? Whose blood vials are they? Are they the same ones as Richtofen's? Or are they someone else's entirely? Like, there's a lot of things based on that alone that leads us into a bunch of different bread trails that we can now follow and try to figure out what they mean. But it didn't end there, because Richtofen's response also leads a lot more into that, because what he tells them is that, one, they're for the future, so we know they're going to be important for the future, so we can start theorizing for that. But two, he can't tell us yet, because he can't have him knowing. And who is this guy he's worried about? I mean, it could be a lot of people get theorized, but hey, maybe it's that guy that finally properly got introduced in this map, Dr. Monty. And now what this does is make us question, wait, can we trust Dr. Monty after all? Why is Richtofen trying to hide these blood files for him? Like, what is it really going to do? And this sets up so much more pieces of the puzzles just in this conversation alone. And that is the magic of the OG story, because it ties into the past, what's happened in previous maps. It alludes to the future and even talks about what's happening in the current map. That's how you tell a Call of Duty zombie story. That's what the Ether story did, and that's what they need to do in Black Ops 7. And the thing is that even though I've had issues with the modern story, it's not like it's been all bad. There's been glimpses of the OG storytelling that we've seen here and there. In Black Ops 6 alone, I think of two great examples. One is the whole Pano story. I think any OG zombie storyline fan would tell you that that is some of the best stuff that we've seen in the modern story, because it feels like the OG story. That whole Pano story, he's talking to someone in the Dark Ether. He's some scientist who's kind of crazy on his own, has his own bad intentions and all that. Now, again, we'll ignore how things didn't get paid off in the way we wanted them to, but it was still very interesting when we were getting that, because every single map we get more teases on the identity of who that person in the Dark Ether Panos was talking to. Like, every single map we get a little something, and that was cool because it was tying into the past and also alluding towards the future. That was really cool, and I really like that. And it wasn't only that, there's also a radio on Citadel de Mor that was super interesting, and my favorite radio in the game. And what this was actually craft when he adopted Richtofen as a child, saying that he had nightmares about this house. And that started so many conversations because, wait, does Richtofen remember his time in the house or not? Like, what's going on there? And also, does that mean the house is going to be important again in the future? I mean, maybe. And I mean, from what we see in Black Ops 7, it might just actually be because we're seeing it in the exfils. So potentially it is. And that is cool. That is what we like. Stuff like that. So Treyarch, I know you still have it in you because we see little glimpses of it here and there, but it is a vast minority of content and story information that we get in this game. Because unfortunately, most radios, most conversations, and most documents have one big problem. They're just yapping about things too much and over explaining things. Because even when most of the time they do talk about something interesting, they just over explain it. And this was especially a big problem in the Cold War story more than the Black Ops 6 story, but it was also there because any major story beat that we were interested in that could potentially be interested was just flat out explained to us. And this is the problem with most of just the story information they give as a whole, because they just be yapping too much and they be over explaining everything, not making anything a mystery, not leaving any puzzle pieces for us to follow, not leaving any breadcrumbs for us to follow. Anytime they give us major story beats, they explain it in its entirety right away. They don't allude to anything or anything like that. There's so many examples of this because especially in Cold War, it was the biggest problem. Like, this was the biggest problem with that story. Well, at least after not having a playable crew, but it was still the second biggest problem. But as to use a more recent example, I think the best example of this, of just not alluding to things and making things feel like a puzzle, is a story of Reckoning. Because in Reckoning, all of a sudden it's just revealed to us in a conversation that Samantha apparently has been dead this whole time. There was no hints of that at all before. All of a sudden she's just dead. One of the most iconic characters in the history of Call of Duty Zombies is just dead now, and now we hear that from Richtofen, the Sam AI, and the Forsaken. That's how we're finding out, just like that. You didn't allude to that. In fact, you straight up lied to us in the past that she was still alive multiple times. Like, what is going on here? Like, you just straight up explain everything. Like, if you're going to kill off the character for whatever reason, like, whatever, that's what you decided. But the fact that you didn't give this character the courtesy to actually be sent off in any amazing way, or at least allude to the possibility that she was dead this whole time at all before, we're just going to say she's dead in a conversation, no build up to that at all. Like, bro, what are we doing here? And there's so many examples of this over and over and over and over again. It's so bad. It just straight up explains everything. And I mean, if that's a story Treyarch wants to tell, I mean, it's their story at the end of the day, but that's not what made the zombie story so magical in the past. It wasn't straight up explaining everything to us. It wasn't a bunch of self-contained stories per map, but more importantly, it wasn't so linear. It just didn't always tell the story in one direction with a couple things thrown here and there in the past. A lot of things were tied into the past. A lot of story beats were tied into the past. They used their own story and their own history to tell the future of the story. Whereas a lot of times with this Dark Ether story, it feels like they're always just doing something different with their next map. Like, honestly, think about it. Literally going game from game, they feel like entirely different stories. You look at the story of Cold War, it's supposed to be this realistic CIA, KGB story. Then all of a sudden in Cold War, then in Black Ops 6, we're having all this magical stuff going on here with Janice, which is cool or whatever. And then now with Black Ops 7, we're going to the Dark Ether, the OG characters are back. Like, how are you tying into your stuff? How are you explaining it? And I'm not saying this, that you shouldn't change your story as the games go on. That's not what I'm saying, but these stories don't tie into each other anymore. Like, how many things from Black Ops 6 tied into Cold War? Honestly, how many things? Like, a couple things here or there, and even when they tied in, they were pretty bad. I mean, I don't even know. Like, it's just so, like, not what the zombie storyline used to be. It's not as interesting, and it's just annoying to me that that's the case. And I really hope in Black Ops 7 they could just find that magic again. But there is one last thing, and I try to say this stuff without sounding rude to Treyarch in the most way I can, but there's one thing I just got to say because it is just so bad in Black Ops 6. But Treyarch, learn your own story. Like, it is insane. Like, the disrespect towards the Chaos story was absolutely insane. nothing made sense with that Chaos Story tie-in. Like, why the hell was a disciple wearing the cloaks of the High Priest of Chaos with no explanation? One of the most important characters and powerful characters in the Chaos Story, and then the disciple just wearing his clothes with no explanation? Or how does the Sentinel artifact work so much different from how it did in the Chaos Story? Like, it's so weird that you just ignored how the things worked in your own story and then just changed them for this game. Like, it's just, what are you doing? And it's not even just the Chaos stuff, it's everything. Like the Forsaken from Cold War all of a sudden just turned into a big old joke in this story after being one of the most all-powerful characters in the history of Call of Duty Zombies. Or how about this whole hidden story in the background that Richtofen's son was potentially in the Dark Ether this whole time? If not alive, at least he was in there at one point, but that just goes nowhere. Or you just introduce artifacts without explaining them at all. How about the Shattered Veils artifact that Richtofen has that helps him escape the temporal whatever it is? Like, no explanation for that? Or how about just completely forgetting how your characters work? Like, how about Strauss all of a sudden just hating magic and all of this in Terminus, whereas literally in the intel from the Cold War, we have him looking up to a freaking demonologist, Gabriel Kraft. Like, what is going on here? Like, stuff like that where it just feels like you don't even know your own story. It's just insane. I don't even know what to make of that stuff. And I mean, I'm not trying to sound condescending here, but this is just an embarrassing mistake. How can you just not know your own story in the past? And when you do tie into things in the past, you just do it wrong and it doesn't make sense. Like, you just don't know your own story, and it's crazy. Like, they need to hire someone who just knows the story well, and they need to go to that guy anytime they try to involve something from the past. They gotta check with this guy, see if it checks out, and then they could do it. Because right now, it's just embarrassing. That is honestly the most embarrassing things I've ever seen in Call of Duty Zombies history. Like, that's just embarrassing for the story writers that I don't know how to say without sounding rude, honestly. Like, it's just embarrassing. But of course, there's a lot of other smaller things that you could get into, but those, in my opinion, are the biggest things that Treyarch can do to make the story amazing. And I hope they could do it, because I do have a little hope. There are some things to look forward to, because now the fact that we're not in the real world anymore, we're in the Dark Ether, we have crazy fun locations that they can just have fun with, and they could tie more into the past. That's going to be fun. But then on top of that, they are bringing back the OG characters, which I did say at the start of this video is something to worry about because they might ruin them. But at the same time, I mean, if you think about it, the story has kind of always sucked without them. And it's only when they ever came back, because even in the old Ether story, like when we were following the Victus characters, the story was pretty bad and even terrible. But then all of a sudden in Origins, they come back and all of a sudden the story's great again. So I don't know, maybe Treyarch just doesn't know how to tell this story unless it's with those characters. So maybe for some reason now those characters are back, all the magic is going to return. I mean, that might just be some copium, but hey, it does have some, history behind it. So, but regardless though, to wrap this all up, I just want to say this, Treyarch. The things you need to do are these 4 things. 1, know your own story. That's important. But after that, tell a story where the details matter. Tell a story where it all ties together. Tell a story that feels like a mystery and feels like a puzzle so the community can feel involved in this story again, where we could be making videos, theories, and talking about it constantly, because that's the magic of the OG story. And I've done my best to explain it in this video, but sometimes I'm not the best with my words, so I hope I did a good job at it, because it's really hard to talk about and explain the magic of that OG story, and I really tried my best with this video. But regardless though, I'm still excited for Black Ops 7, still worried about the story though, but I'm hoping for the best. But with that said, as always, I'd love to hear all of you guys' opinions about anything we talked about in this video. Did I make a mistake anywhere, especially with everything we talked about? Or is there anything you want to even add on to this? I'd love to hear all that down in the comment section below. And also, if you guys want to support the channel in any way, shape, or form, I'd appreciate it. Drop a like, subscribe, bell, share, or even join the channel. I'd love you for that. But with that said, I'm going to go, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.